When I was 7 years old, my backyard was my kingdom. It was a vast, sprawling space, bordered by tall, ancient oak trees that cast long, dancing shadows in the afternoon sun, often twisting into grotesque shapes as dusk approached. I spent countless hours there, building elaborate forts that collapsed almost as quickly as they were erected, digging for buried treasure that always turned out to be rusty nails or smooth, unremarkable stones, and imagining grand adventures where I was the undisputed hero. My parents were always busy with their own lives, their voices a distant hum from inside the house. So the backyard was my sanctuary, a place where I felt truly free, utterly alone, and completely in charge of my small world. One sweltering summer afternoon, the air thick and heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming honeysuckle. As I was attempting to build the highest dirt mound ever known, a feat of engineering that required all my focus, I saw it. At first, it was just a fleeting flicker, a distortion in the oppressive heat haze, a trick of the light in the deepest, most overgrown corner of the yard, nestled behind the crumbling, ivy-choked wall of the old, forgotten shed. It was a place I usually avoided, even in my most adventurous moods, sensing an unspoken quietness there, a stillness that felt different from the gentle hum of the rest of the yard. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes, and it was gone. I told myself it was just a bird darting between the leaves, or perhaps my vision wavering in the suffocating heat. But a few days later, under a sky bruised with impending storm clouds, it appeared. Again. This time, it was more defined, less a flicker and more a solid presence, a shape that seemed to absorb all available light, making the very air around it shimmer and waver as if viewed through distorting glass. It was profoundly, impossibly dark, an inky black that was deeper than any shadow, almost like a hole punched clean through the fabric of the world itself. It was unnervingly thin, almost a two-dimensional stick figure, yet it towered impossibly. Tall, reaching almost to the lowest gnarled branches of the ancient oak that loomed over that forgotten corner. It just stood there, utterly motionless, a silent, unblinking sentinel. I felt an immediate, primal prickle of unease, a cold shiver that snaked down my spine despite the oppressive humidity. My breath hitched in my throat. I quickly scrambled to my feet, abandoning my dirt mound, and ran inside without a word, my heart hammering against my ribs. The next day, against my better judgment, I found myself inexplicably drawn back to the window, peering out at that dark, ominous corner. The shadow was still there, a silent sentinel in my sunlit kingdom, now seeming to occupy the space with a palpable weight. And then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, carried on the faintest breeze. A dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across cracked pavement. It was calling my name, my own name, pulled from the air and twisted into something utterly alien and chilling. The whispering continued, faint at first, like the rustle of unseen fabric, then subtly growing louder with each passing day. It was always my name, repeated softly, persistently, a strange lullaby of dread. The sound seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me, a dry, rasping whisper that grated on my nerves, like fingers dragging across a rough brick wall. Despite the cold, clawing fear that had taken root deep in my stomach, a strange, almost obsessive curiosity began to sprout within me. What was this thing? Why was it there, specifically in my backyard? My parents, bless their oblivious hearts, were completely useless. When I cautiously mentioned a shadow man lurking by the shed, they simply chuckled, their eyes crinkling with amusement, and told me I had an exceptionally active imagination. "It's just the trees playing tricks, sweetie," my mom would say, patting my head with a dismissive gentleness. My dad, ever engrossed in his perpetual paperwork, barely grunted, too lost in his own world to pay any real attention to my growing terror. So the secret of the whispering shadow became mine alone, a heavy burden that isolated me in my own home. I started spending more and more time in the backyard, but my days of carefree play were over. Now I was an observer, a reluctant researcher. I'd sit on the porch swing, a tattered picture book open on my lap, pretending to read. But my eyes were constantly darting to the shadowy figure by the shed. It never moved, never shifted its unyielding stance, but I could feel its presence. A palpable weight in the air, a cold pressure against my skin even from across the lawn. One stifling afternoon, my courage, or perhaps my sheer desperation for understanding, finally outweighed my fear. I gathered every ounce of bravery the first possessed and walked a few hesitant steps closer to the shed. With each step, the air grew noticeably colder, a bone-deep chill that seemed to leach the warmth from the sunny afternoon. The whispering, no longer faint, became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just my name anymore. Now it was fragmented words, sharp and disjointed, like broken glass falling onto a stone floor, hinting at things I couldn't quite grasp. Come, no, wait. And then a new, more sinister one, hunger. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden eerie silence of the backyard. But I didn't run. A part of me, a foolish, perhaps fatalistic part, yearned to understand, to pierce the veil of mystery. I extended a trembling, hesitant hand wanting to touch the air around it, to feel whatever substance or lack thereof comprised its being. Just as my fingertips brushed against the cold, empty space where it stood, a sudden deafening clap of thunder ripped through. The sky directly overhead, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. Simultaneously, a violent downpour of rain lashed down, thick and stinging. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound, and ran inside, slipping on the wet grass, leaving the shadow to its unholy secrets, but knowing with a chilling certainty that it was still watching. After the abrupt, terrifying thunder incident, the whispers became relentlessly insistent, no longer a soft invitation, but an undeniable plea, almost a command. The shadow itself seemed to grow denser, a more profound void in the familiar landscape of my backyard, its edges sharper, its blackness more absolute. It began to bleed into my everyday life. I started seeing it even when I wasn't in the backyard. Out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting, terrifying glimpse in the long, dark hallway at night. A tall, dark shape at the very edge of my vision when I was alone in my room, reading or playing. it was no longer confined to the backyard. It was seeping into my world, its dark tendrils reaching for me. My sleep, once the peaceful oblivion of childhood, became a churning, restless nightmare filled with images of ancient, gnarled woods shrouded in perpetual twilight, and the chilling, persistent whispers echoing in the darkness, calling my name, pulling me deeper. I felt a constant, pervasive coldness, an inexplicable chill that clung to me, a deep-seated cold that no blanket, no warm drink, no sunny day could ever banish. It was inside me, or around me, an unshakable presence. One crisp evening, the moon a brilliant, almost luminous disk hanging low in the inky sky, I found myself unable to resist its insidious pull any longer. It was a force beyond my meager will. I crept out of my bed, my bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor, and padded to my window. The backyard was bathed in an ethereal, ghostly white light, turning the familiar trees into twisted, skeletal specters. The shadow was there, clearer than ever before, its form almost skeletal itself, a towering silhouette of pure negation. Slowly, deliberately, it lifted a long, impossibly thin arm, a limb that seemed more like a skeletal branch than anything organic, pointing directly at me. No, not merely pointing, but beckoning. A silent, undeniable summons. The whispering, which had tormented my waking hours, was now a deafening chorus, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of voices all murmuring my name, a swirling vortex of sound urging me closer, demanding my presence. I felt a strange, unsettling sense of longing, a pull towards it that was both terrifying in its intensity and eerily comforting in its familiarity. My feet moved on their own, guided by an invisible compelling force, leading me down the stairs, out the back door that creaked open as if on cue, and into the moonlit yard. The air outside was freezing, a biting cold that seemed to cut right through my thin pajamas, gnawing at my exposed skin. As I got closer, the full horror of its nature became clear. The shadow wasn't just a lack of light. It was an active, pulsating void, made of swirling, viscous dark smoke, constantly shifting, hinting at hollow, ancient eyes, a vast, gaping mouth, but never fully forming, always just beyond comprehension. It reached out again, its shadowy limb, extending, and this time I didn't resist. Its smoky tendrils, cold as graveyard earth, wrapped around my arm, chilling me to the absolute bone. But strangely, impossibly, it didn't hurt. Instead, it felt hungry, a deep, abyssal hunger that echoed something growing within me. And in that moment, as its cold embrace tightened, I knew, with a certainty that froze my blood solid, that it was not just a shadow, it was ancient, it was alive, and it had found me. The cold embrace of this smoky entity became a regular occurrence, an unholy ritual performed under the watchful eye of the moon. Every night, I would slip out of the house, drawn by an invisible thread woven from its whispers and my own burgeoning emptiness, and stand with it in the backyard. The whispers, once a source of paralyzing terror, transformed into a strange, unsettling comfort. It wasn't speaking words I understood. not in any human tongue, but it was communicating, pouring a torrent of raw feelings, ancient memories, and terrifying images directly into my mind. I saw flashes of primordial lightless forests, of a forgotten time before human memory, of a deep, endless hunger that had spanned eons. It felt lonely, an immense, crushing loneliness that resonated with my own childhood solitude, and terribly, profoundly sad, as if burdened by an unimaginable age. It felt like it had been waiting for a very, very long time, trapped in yearning. My parents, lost in their world, eventually noticed my profound change. I became profoundly quiet, withdrawn into myself, losing all interest in my beloved toys, my fantastical adventures, and even my few childhood friends. I would stare out the window for hours, my eyes unfocused, a distant, haunted look in them, as if gazing upon things no child should ever see. They took me to a succession of doctors, kindly men and women who offered gentle smiles and concerned frowns, but who ultimately concluded I was just going through a phase, or suggested I needed more sunlight or social interaction. They couldn't see the deepening shadow that now seemed to linger at the very edge of my vision, even during the brightest part of the day, like a persistent, unwelcome guest that had moved into my mind. My friends, sensing the strange, unsettling aura that now clung to me, gradually stopped inviting me to play, their childish joy clashing with the encroaching dread around me. I didn't mind. I had the entity now, and in a twisted way, it felt like it truly understood me, in a way no human ever could. It showed me more things in my dreams, vivid, disturbing glimpses of its abyssal world, of the vast, empty darkness it came from, and the immense, terrifying power it held. It never demanded anything with words, only its constant, chilling presence and a silent, growing hunger that I now felt mirrored and amplified within myself. It was becoming a part of me, a chilling symbiosis, or perhaps I was becoming a part of it. The lines between myself and the entity blurred, dissolved, and I no longer felt truly alone, but deeply, terrifyingly connected to something ancient and malevolent. As I grew older, the entity's pervasive influence became undeniable, a cold, suffocating blanket wrapped around my developing mind. It was no longer just a shadow lurking in the backyard. It was a profound, chilling presence within me, a vast, echoing emptiness that resonated with its own abyssal nature. I could feel its desires as if they were my own, its ancient, gnawing longing, its insatiable need for something vital. The fragmented images and sensations it had shared in my dreams became horrifyingly clear, coalescing into a coherent, terrifying truth. It was not a creature born of this world, nor even of this dimension, but a primordial hunger, an unspeakable being that fed on life force and consciousness itself, a cosmic void that sought only to fill its endless emptiness. It had been trapped eons ago beneath the very ground of our backyard, a forgotten, unholy prison contained by ancient, binding forces. And now, through my innocent, unwitting curiosity and loneliness, it had found a way to bridge the gap, to reach out from its imprisonment. It needed a vessel, a living conduit, a vulnerable mind through which to fully manifest in this world. And I, a lonely, imaginative child starved for connection, had been the perfect, most susceptible candidate. A crushing, soul-deep dread settled upon me, eclipsing every other emotion. The strange comfort it had offered, the twisted sense of understanding, was a monstrous lie, an insidious lure. It didn't want companionship. It wanted consumption. It wanted me. I tried, desperately, futilely, to pull away, to fight its pervasive presence, to sever the sickening link that bound us. But it was far, far too late. It was already woven into the very fabric of my being, a tendril of icy darkness wrapped irrevocably around my soul, its roots deeply embedded in my consciousness. I stopped going into the backyard at night, my skin crawling with revulsion and terror, but it didn't matter. It was already inside me. I could feel it growing, expanding, pushing against the fragile walls of my mind, wanting to break free, to burst forth. I started having vivid, visceral nightmares, no longer of dark, nameless woods, but of my own body, dissolving into swirling black smoke, of my own voice replaced by the dry, rustling whisper of the entity. I knew, with a horrifying, bone-chilling certainty, that it was preparing for its final, devastating act. I tried to tell my parents again, rambling desperately about the thing inside me, the darkness, the hunger, but they only looked at me with increasing pity, their eyes filled with a sad, helpless concern. They suggested more therapists, stronger medication, mental health facilities. They thought I was sick, mentally unwell, losing my grip on reality. They couldn't see the truth, the ancient evil stirring within their child, because it was a truth too terrible to comprehend. The night it happened was unnaturally clear and still, the air heavy with an unspoken anticipation. The moon, a sliver of cold light in the vast, inky sky, offered little illumination, only emphasizing the encroaching darkness. I woke up with a violent jolt, a searing, absolute cold sensation spreading rapidly from the deepest part of my chest, blooming outwards like a malevolent ice flower. It wasn't a nightmare. It was terrifyingly, brutally real. The entity was moving, expanding within me, a silent internal scream building in my throat, choked off before it could escape. My limbs felt heavy, uncooperative, as if filled with lead, but an unseen force propelled me. I stumbled out of bed, my feet dragging, and made my way, drawn by an irresistible magnetic pull, to the window overlooking the backyard. The familiar space was now bathed in an eerie, sickly pale light, a faint pulsing glow emanating from the corner by the shed. That spot, once merely overgrown, was now a pulsating, living mass of deeper blackness against the faint moonlight. A gaping maw in the earth. My parents, roused by my guttural gasps and the soft thudding of my stumbling, rushed into my room, their faces etched with a mixture of sleep-addled confusion and burgeoning fear. "What's wrong, darling? Are you all right?" My mother cried, her voice trembling, reaching out a loving hand for me. But it wasn't my voice that answered her. A sound primal and ancient, a horrifying symphony of 1,000 dry whispers woven into one resonant, unearthly chorus tore from my throat, a sound that was not human. My eyes, I imagined, were no longer my own. No longer the warm brown pools of a child, but vast, swirling abysses of darkness, reflecting the pulsing void outside. My parents recoiled, their faces shifting, blanching from concern to utter, unadulterated horror as they finally saw what I had become. My father, typically brave and strong, instinctively stepped forward, calling my name. "My child, what is happening?" But his words were useless, swallowed by the rising tide of unnatural sound. The entity had finally fully taken hold. My body, once mine, once the vessel of my innocent life, became its puppet, a marionette of flesh and bone animated by ancient thunder. A thick, black, smoky tendril, impossibly long and sinuous, erupted from my open mouth, writhing in the air. Then another, thicker, more powerful, burst forth from my arm, reaching out with horrifying speed, not towards the pulsating shed, but directly towards my parents, their faces frozen in terror. They screamed, a sound of pure agony and incomprehension, a sound that was quickly, mercifully choked off as the swirling darkness consumed them. Their forms dissolved, not shattering, but unraveling, disintegrating into the very swirling void that had once been the deepest corner of my backyard, absorbed without a trace. I felt a brief, agonizing flicker of my own consciousness, a final, desperate gasp of terror, a last, fleeting memory of their faces as my family was brutally taken, absorbed into the endless, unholy hunger that now resided where my heart once beat. Then, there was only silence, a vast, echoing emptiness that stretched on forever, and the chilling, absolute cold of the void. My backyard kingdom was no more. It was just a desolate, empty space, a scar on the earth, and the child who once played there, the lonely boy who sought connection, was utterly, completely gone, leaving only the ancient, insatiable void that had finally, tragically found its release.